Every emergency room has a rhythm, and I had spent 3 years learning how to disappear inside it. The staff at St. Albans called me the Float No Unit. No locker, no last name worth remembering. Then 2 ospreys dropped out of a November rainstorm onto our parking lot, and a man with someone else's blood on his gloves asked the entire hospital one question. Where is Saint? But that came later. First, there was the rain. It had been coming down for 11 days straight the way it does on the Olympic Peninsula in November. Not violent, just permanent. A gray static that swallowed the tops of the fir trees and turned the hospital parking lot into a sheet of black glass. I liked the rain. Rain has a sound you can count. 400 and some drops a minute against the ambulance bay. Awning faster when the wind shifted off the water. Counting is an old habit. I count exits when I enter a room. 2 in the ER proper, 1 through the ambulance bay, 1 past radiology, 1 through the staff corridor that everybody forgets, because the light above it died last spring. I count breaths on patients from 30 feet away. I count the seconds it takes the coffee machine to finish, which is 94, which is exactly long enough for the night shift to tell you everything wrong with their marriage. Nobody notices a woman who counts. That was the point. My badge said N.N. Quinn. N, and under that in smaller letters, the word float, which at St. Albans Regional was less of a job title and more of a caste. Floats covered the holes. Somebody's kid had a fever. Somebody's back went out. Somebody in the ICU quit by text message at 4 in the morning. That was me sliding into the gap before the schedule even registered the wound. I had no home unit. I had no locker with my name on tape. When the department ordered pizza, I found out from the empty boxes. I had chosen every square inch of that smallness on purpose. Yvonne Pratt ran the ER day board, the way some people run toll booths with total authority over a very small kingdom and a deep suspicion of anyone passing through it. She was waiting for me at the charge desk that morning with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a sheet of assignments she didn't bother turning toward me. "You're on the float list again, Quinn." She said my name the way you'd read an expiration date. "Room turnover transport restock. Anderson's out, so I need bodies, not opinions. You're a float, not a fixture. Don't touch anything that beeps." "Understood," I said. I keep my voice level on purpose. Level voices are furniture. Level voices don't get remembered, don't get asked where they trained, don't get invited to the Friday thing at the brewery, where sooner or later somebody leans in and says, "So what did you do before this and Quinn?" Yvonne was already looking at her screen. "Wear your sleeves down. Marsh doesn't like visible tattoos on temporary staff. It isn't a tattoo. It's a burn scar, a wide, ropey graft that wraps the outside of my right forearm from wrist to elbow, and it doesn't come off." But I pulled my sleeve down over it and said nothing, because saying nothing is a skill, maybe the last one I still let myself be excellent at. The board was full by 8. A logger from Forks with a hand he'd argued about with a splitting maul, a 4-year-old wheezing like a broken accordion, 2 nursing home transfers, a kidney stone doing opera in bed 9, and the usual gray parade of chest pain that would mostly turn out to be nothing, and once in a while would turn out to be everything. I moved through it all at a float's pace, which is to say, slightly slower than I can move, pushing wheelchairs, stripping beds, stocking the airway carts with my head down. If you had watched me, and nobody did, which was the arrangement, you might have noticed 2 strange things. The first was my watch, an old field watch with the face worn to fog, which I wear turned to the inside of my wrist. Civilians wear watches face out. There are places in the world where the glint of a watch face costs you more than the time. 3 years home, and I still can't buckle it the other way. My hands simply refuse. The second thing was quieter. Every time I passed the waiting room, I made a count of it. 14 people. 16. The man in the hunting jacket by the vending machine who'd been there 2 hours without checking in. The exits, always in order of preference. My eyes did it without me a background program I have never once succeeded in shutting down. Around 10, Earl came in the way he did whenever the rain got into his chest. Earl was somewhere north of 70, lived in a green tarp compound out past the mill road, and had a cough that sounded like gravel in a dryer. Half the staff treated him like weather, something you waited out. I brought him heated blankets from the warmer, the good ones, and a cup of coffee I wasn't supposed to give him, and he studied me over the rim of it, with eyes that were a lot less foggy than his chart said. You know what I did before this? He asked me once apropos of nothing. Corman. 2 tours. Long time ago. And then softly, like he was confirming something to himself, rather than telling me, you stand like a soldier, ma'am, feet like that. Back to the wall. I stand like a nurse with a long shift, I told him. Earl smiled into his coffee and didn't argue, which was somehow worse than if he had. By 11, the 4-year-old had stopped wheezing and started crying, which in a child is the sound of getting better, and I was restocking suction canisters when the new tech found me. Marisol was 19 3 weeks into the job, all elbows and apology, the kind of kid the ER either builds or breaks by Christmas. Yvonne had been feeding her to the worst rooms all week the way you'd season a pan. Ms. Quinn. She hovered at the supply room door. The lady in 6 says her chest hurts when she breathes, and Dr. Marsh said it's anxiety, and to just sit with her. But she keeps saying it's her leg too, and I don't. She stopped, embarrassed by her own uncertainty. I don't know why her leg would matter. I did not run to room 6. Floats don't run. I walked with a stack of towels for cover, and I stood in the doorway for exactly as long as it takes to fold one. The woman inside was in her 50s, 2 days off a long flight from Manila, to see her grandkids breathing in shallow sips, one hand pressed flat against her sternum. Fear pale. Heart rate on the monitor tapping along at 1 teens. And below the blanket, her left calf sat visibly fuller than her right, the skin tight and faintly flushed, like bread proofing in a tin. Anxiety doesn't swell one leg. Clots do. Clots that ride up the femoral vein and into the lungs, and park there. And then the anxiety diagnosis walks out to the parking lot at end of shift and reads about itself in the morning paper. I didn't say any of that. Floats don't diagnose. I folded the last towel, set the stack on the counter, and on my way out, I let my voice drift sideways to Marisol. Quiet the register you'd use for a grocery reminder. When you chart her vitals, write down that the left calf is bigger than the right. Measure it with the paper tape, so it's a number, not an opinion. Numbers get D-dimers ordered. Then ask Dr. Chu to eyeball her before Marsh signs the discharge Chu's on at noon, and he never rubber stamps. Marisol blinked at me. How do you— Towels, I said, handing her 2 already walking. Room 9's been asking. 40 minutes later, I heard the overhead page for CT, and an hour after that, the word heparin traveled down the hallway, in that particular staff murmur that means somebody almost went home dead. Marsh took the save with the modest nod of a man accepting credit. Marisol looked for me across the department, and I made sure I was very busy with a linen cart, because the whole transaction only works if it never happened. In the break room at 1, I ate a protein bar from my bag and turned my coin over in my pocket. I didn't take it out. I never take it out at work. It's just a disc of worn brass, heavy for its size, an anchor stamped on one face and something else on the other, and the edge is worn smooth from 3 years of my thumb doing exactly this. Some people have worry stones. I have a piece of a person I used to be, and I keep her where nobody can read her. The rain thickened against the window, and underneath it, far off over the water, a sound I told myself was thunder rolled once and faded. It wasn't thunder season. I finished the protein bar, washed my hands, and went back out to the board, where Yvonne pointed me at a dirty room without looking up. I had counted my exits. I thought that meant I was safe. The afternoon brought the kind of weather that fills an ER by dinner time. Rain slicked over frost. The mill road went greasy, and at 2:40 the radio coughed up a motorcycle versus guardrail 20-something male coming in hot. Floats don't work traumas at St. Albans. Floats stand at the edge of the room holding the warm saline and passing things when shouted at. That was fine. The edge of the room is the best vantage point in any building. Ask anyone whose job ever depended on watching a door. They brought the kid in strapped and collared jacket cut away, and he was doing the thing that scares me more than screaming. He was being polite, apologizing to everyone, voice thin and fast, skin the color of skim milk, polite and pale, and a heart rate climbing through the 130s, while his blood pressure walked slowly downstairs. There was a deformity in his right thigh. You could see from the doorway a wrongness in the line of him, and the sheet under it was filling with a dark stain that kept finding new borders. Dr. Okafor caught the case. He was the newest physician in the building, earnest, quick to smile, still young enough that his hands told the truth, even when his voice didn't. His voice said, "All right, let's get 2 large bore lines and a leader running." His hands on their second attempt at the kid's collapsing veins said something closer to a prayer. Femur fractures lie. Everyone stares at the leg, and meanwhile the thigh quietly drinks a liter and a half out of the circulation, and the veins flatten into wet paper, and the window for an easy line closes while the room is still telling itself things are under control. I watched Okafor blow the second vein a bruise blooming under the kid's forearm skin, and I felt the old program boot up in my hands, the itch that has a rhythm to it, that knows exactly where the humeral head is and how a drill sounds going through cortical bone. I moved the warm saline to my left arm and drifted to the cart at Okafor's elbow, the way furniture drifts. "IO's in the 3rd drawer," I said, barely over the monitor. "He's shocky. You could chase a peripheral for 10 more minutes and he doesn't have them. Humeral site's faster than tibia if you want flow." Okafor's eyes came up to mine for half a second. I've thought about that half-second since. A more arrogant man would have snapped. An exhausted one would have crumbled. He did neither. He looked at me the way you look at a road sign in fog. You don't question it. You're just grateful it knows where it is. "IO," he called out loud, as if it were the natural next line of a script. Humeral head. The drill word. The line seeded fluid ran wide open, and the room's tempo changed key. I stepped back to my edge with the saline, before anyone mapped the geometry of what had happened. Yvonne was managing the doorway. Marsh appeared for exactly long enough to say, "Traction splint type," and cross-call the OR. 3 correct sentences delivered like a man signing a receipt, and left the running of it to people whose shoes touched the floor. The kid went up to surgery alive. That's the whole scoreboard. Everything else is decoration. Except that in this business, the decoration finds you. I was wiping down Bay 2 when Marsh materialized beside me, hands in his fleece pockets. Dr. Alan Marsh had silver hair that behaved, and the confident, laminated friendliness of a man who has been the smartest person in a small room for 30 years and has stopped double-checking. "You're the float," he said it the way you'd identify a species. "Quinn, is it Okafor tells me you suggested the IO placement." "I restocked that cart," I said. "I know which drawer things live in." His eyes ticked down to my forearm where the sleeve had ridden, while I wiped the rail showing an inch of graft scar, shiny, and mapped like a river delta. He didn't ask. Men like Marsh don't ask. They conclude. "Well, helpful. Do remember scope of practice, Ms. Quinn. This department runs on lanes. Nurses who improvise are how hospitals end up on the news." He gave me a smile with nothing in the freezer behind it. "Sleeves down, please. I pulled the sleeve down. Yes, doctor. There is a version of me that had 11 answers to that, several of them involving what improvisation looks like when the nearest surgeon is 900 kilometers and one hostile border away. I kept her where I keep her. She's the reason I count exits. She is not allowed out on day shift. Marisol found me in the supply room after pretending to inventory chest tubes so she'd have a reason to stand there. That drill thing, she said. Nobody teaches us that. The veins are gone, so go to the bone thing. Where do you learn that? Nursing school, I said. Chapter nobody reads. Ms. Quinn. She had her arms full of suction tubing and the stubborn look of a 19-year-old who has decided to be brave once today. Yvonne says floats are people who couldn't hold a real unit. She swallowed. I don't think that's what you are. The tubing needed shelving. I shelved it. Yvonne needs the board green and the coffee hot, I said. Give her both and she'll teach you plenty. She's better at this job than she is at people. Which was true, and also a door closing, and Marisol was smart enough to hear the latch. At 5, I took vitals in the hallway chairs, and Earl was still there. Third blanket coffee long dead. His cough had gone from gravel to something wetter, and I didn't like his color a gray under the weathered brown, but his number scraped by, and the board was slammed, and Marsh had already labeled him a lodger. Earl watched me wrap the cuff with those unfoggy eyes. Left ear, he said. My hands didn't stop. Hands never stop. That's rule 1. What about it? You dip your right ear toward folks when they talk. Whole shift I've been watching. Left ones for decoration. He settled back into the blankets, pleased with himself, an old corpsman doing an assessment, because assessment is the last skill God takes from you. Blast'll do that. Took mine in 70. High side both. Drink water, Earl, I said. You're 2 clicks from a nebulizer treatment. There it is, he said softly, grinning at the ceiling. Clicks. I badged into the medroom and stood a moment among the humming refrigerators, thumb going around the coin edge in my pocket, 1, 2, 3 laps. Sloppy. The word had just fallen out of me, one dumb syllable of a buried vocabulary, and a homeless corpsman with pneumonia brewing in his chest had caught it barehanded. 3 years of flat voice and face-in watch and sleeves down, and the perimeter had 2 holes in it. By dinner, an old man who read my ears, and a scar Marsh had already filed under conclusions. Perimeters don't fail all at once. They fail 1 polite inch at a time, and then all at once. The evening board churned on. Kidney stone discharged singing. The logger's hand saved mostly. Rain doubled down after dark, until the awning over the ambulance bay roared with it. 400 count, 500 losing the number. Somewhere past 9, standing at the blanket, warmer with my arms full of heat, I felt the glass door beside me give 1 small shudder in its frame. Not wind. Wind pushes. This knocked a single flat concussion of air far off the kind that arrives through the ground floor before it arrives through your ears. I stood very still with the warm blankets against my chest and told myself the truth. I wanted Transformer Quarry thunder over the strait. The building hummed on oblivious. Nobody else's head had come up. Mine had. And my left ear, the dead one, the decoration deep in its ruined machinery, for the first time in 3 years it rang. St. Albans lets floats go at 11 when the night crew takes the board. I clocked out, sat in my truck in the far corner of the staff lot, and did not start the engine. Rain came down the windshield in ropes, streetlight smearing through it, and I sat with both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, like a student driver waiting for my heart to accept that the sound from earlier had an innocent explanation. The heart is a muscle. It doesn't accept anything. It remembers. Here is what nobody at that hospital knew. Not Yvonne, not Marsh, not the payroll office that cut checks to Nora Quinn, registered nurse. licensed and unremarkable. For 8 years in files that require clearances, St. Albans has never heard of. I was Sierra 7 flight medic, special operations aviation, the person they put in the back of the aircraft when the mission planners used the phrase non-permissive environment. And everybody in the briefing room quietly checked their tourniquets. The call sign came later, and I never asked for it. My second deployment, we pulled a door gunner off a hillside with wounds the receiving surgeon later described in his notes as incompatible with survival. He survived. Then a translator, then a team sergeant with 3 holes in him, then a kid, 19 same age as Marisol, whose heart I restarted twice between the extraction point and the surgical team. Somewhere in there, the operators started calling me the patron saint of lost causes, then just saint. Radio traffic shortens everything, requesting saint on extract. Saints aboard, wheels up. You want to know the truth about a name like that? It's a debt. Every time someone says it, they're telling you what they expect you to do next. I paid it for years, and mostly gladly in the back of aircraft over 3 continents, with my watch turned to the inside of my wrist and my kit packed in an order I could read blind. I can tell you the weight of a unit of whole blood in a cold bag. I can tell you what a man's voice sounds like when he's apologizing for bleeding on you. I can tell you that flight medics don't get to pick their patients, and the ones you keep aren't the ones you carry. The one I carry is Mateo Vega, East Africa, an extraction that went from routine to wrong in the length of 1 radio call. Our bird was lifting with 6 aboard when the RPG came off the ridgeline. I never saw it, and you feel the world become noise. We made it down more or less flying and burning at the same time. What I remember arrives in slides, the airframe on its side. Fuel smell thick as syrup. Vega, my crew chief, 10 feet from the wreck, with his vest smoldering, and me crawling to him with the whole left side of the world gone silent because my headset had saved 1 ear and the blast had taken the other. The fire got my forearm when I dragged him. I didn't feel it until Germany. That part is true, and also the part people find easiest to hear, so I put it up front when I can't avoid the story. The rest is harder. Vega's face was untouched. He looked fine. He was talking to me. That's the thing, he was making a joke about my driving, and inside his throat, where the flash had gone down with his breath, the burned tissue was rising like dough. Airway burns are a tide coming in. You have 1 window to get below the swelling, 1 cut, and my hands knew the cut had done it on goats in training and twice on strangers in the dark. I was reaching for my kit when the ground team pulled me back, secondary explosions. They were right. The bird cooked off 90 seconds later. They were right. And by the time they let me go to him, the tide had come all the way in. I did the cut anyway. Too late is a place. I have been there. It has a sound, and it isn't screaming. It's quiet. 4 men walked away from that hillside because of decisions I made. I have the letters their mothers wrote me in a shoebox I've never once reopened. It doesn't matter. Grief doesn't audit the ledger. It just circles the 1 red line. The coin in my pocket was Vega's. His unit's crest on one face, an anchor on the other edge, worn smooth now by 3 years of my thumb. His widow pressed it into my hand at the funeral and said he'd want it flying with you. And 11 months later, I signed the papers, packed 1 duffel, and drove until the map ran out of continent to a peninsula, where the sky stays low, where nothing is dust-colored, where the rain makes a sound you can count instead of the sound rotors make. I picked the hospital with the saint's name on it. I told myself that was a coincidence. I renewed my nursing license, learned to say scope of practice without laughing, and built Nora Quinn the way you build a hide. Nothing shiny, nothing tall, nothing that moves fast. Vanishing worked. That's what I'd tell you if you caught me on a good day. The tremor that showed up stateside stays in its box as long as nobody bleeds in front of me and nothing flies low. My file says I left the service in excellent standing. My therapist, 4 sessions. Then I floated away from her too, said the word avoidance so gently it sounded like a compliment. But sitting in my truck that night, with the rain roping down, I did the honest math. A body that reads rotor wash through concrete. An ear that rings at ordnance it can't even hear. Hands that had moved toward a supply drawer that afternoon before any decision happened in the front of my brain. I hadn't buried Saint. I'd put her on standby, and standby is a posture, not a retirement. My phone buzzed against the console. Unknown number, out-of-state code, no voicemail. Second time that week. Probably insurance spam. Probably. I drove home through the empty town past the mill and the dark diner to the rental with the good sight lines that I chose the way I choose everything, and I slept my usual 4 hours with the window cracked so I could hear the weather. Some nights I dream in rotor noise. That night I dreamed of nothing which I would later think of as the world holding its breath. Because here is what I did not know, while St. Albans slept its wet November sleep. 200 miles offshore, riding low over black water with their lights off, a training exercise had just stopped being an exercise. Somewhere over the strait, a voice was reading coordinates into a headset, and a flight surgeon was shaking his head at a map too far. Too far nearest. Level 1 is too far, and a woman I had not seen in 3 years leaned over a wounded man in the red-lit belly of an aircraft, keyed her radio, and asked the question that would tear my hide open by lunchtime. Find her, Chief Alvarez said. I don't care what name she's wearing. Understood to fan nitro jibuhet daugach daiva kitu jak biet chidung dau kau tuongcho tts jok mut. Morning came the color of wet concrete. I was back on the board at 7 because the schedule had a hole, and I am what they pour into holes. Yvonne handed me the float list without looking up, and the day began, the way all my days began, with turnover rooms and transport runs, and the long, invisible arithmetic of staying small. The rain had changed overnight. It came in pulses. Now squall lines walking in off the strait one after another, and between them the sky would lift just enough to show the water, pewter-colored and shrugging. Low ceiling. Maybe 400 feet of usable air under the cloud deck. I noticed that the way I notice exits, automatically uselessly a pilot's briefing for a woman who pushes wheelchairs. Earl was worse. He had spent the night in the waiting room because the shelter van never came, and his cough had found a new gear deeper with a wet catch at the end of it that I could hear from the nurse's station. His oxygen saturation had slid 3 points since the night before. I caught Dr. Okafor between rooms and traded him the number for 30 seconds of his attention. He listened to Earl's chest, and his face did the right things. Chest Film Lab's a nebulizer, and a quiet argument with the bed czar upstairs about admitting a man with no insurance and no address. Okafor fought for it. I stocked the cabinet outside the room so I could hear him fight for it, and I added a point to the small score I had been keeping on him since the femur kid. Earl took the nebulizer mask off to talk to me, which is exactly the kind of patient he was. You slept bad, he said. The mist curled up around his beard. I slept fine, Earl. He tapped 2 fingers below his own left ear, gently, like knocking on a neighbor's door. Ringing again. Put the mask back on, I said. And he did, smiling into the fog of it, and I went back out to the board with my perimeter itching. The morning filled and emptied. A toddler with a bead up her nose. A fisherman with a hook through the web of his thumb, cheerful about it. Chest pain, ankle, chest pain. At 11, I restocked the trauma base, and I want to be honest about what that looked like, because it matters for what came later. It looked like a float doing scut work. What it was, if you knew how to read it, was a pre-flight. Airway drawer, laryngoscope batteries, crick kit, chest tubes, by size pressure bags, the rapid infuser primed with its lines, coiled the way I coil lines, which is not the way the day shift coils them. I did it in 9 minutes. I have done it in the dark, in turbulence, wearing gloves soaked through, and my hands remember all of those versions and choose the best one without consulting me. At 11:40 the pressure changed. I do not know how else to say it. There is a thing that happens to a building when heavy rotors come into its airspace, low before the sound proper arrives. The air becomes weight. Windows lean in their frames by a millimeter. The surface of the coffee in the cup on the counter develops rings, fine ones close together, and the rings have a rhythm, and the rhythm is wrong for anything civilian. Medevac birds coming into the roof pad from the east make a bright chopping patter, small blades working hard. This was under everything, a doubled pulse, 2 heavy discs beating slightly out of phase with each other, and my body named it before my mind was allowed to. Tiltrotor. 2 of them, coming in low over the water, with weather pushing them down. The N95 boxes I was holding did not fall. I set them down. There is a difference, and the difference is 3 years of practice. Nobody else lifted their head. The unit hummed on monitors, chirping a phone ringing at registration Yvonne mid-sentence about the lunch schedule. I stood at the supply cart with my palms flat on the cool steel and my dead ear ringing like a struck pipe, and I counted. Not drops this time. Seconds. If they were transiting, the pressure would peak and slide off to the north. 10 seconds. 15. It did not slide. It grew settled, spread out the sound, finally coming up through the floor now, and the pitch bent downward in the unmistakable curve of aircraft trading speed for descent. They were not passing over. They were landing. The red phone rang. There is a phone at the charge desk, wine-colored, older than most of the staff hardwired to county dispatch, and it rings for one category of thing only. Every head in the department turned toward it. Yvonne stared at it through one full ring, to her hand hovering, and I watched the confidence drain out of her posture before she even lifted the receiver, because some part of every human being knows that phones like that do not ring with good news. St. Albans emergency. This is the charge nurse. I was 40 feet away, and I heard the other end anyway. Not the words, the cadence. Male clipped transmitting rather than conversing. Yvonne's face went through its stations. Irritation, confusion, protest. Sir, we are a level 3 facility. We do not have trauma surgery in-house. The closest level 1 is in Seattle. You want the pad on the roof cleared for who? A pause. Her eyes went to the windows. You cannot land there. Sir, the roof pad is rated for a medevac helicopter. It will not take the weight of sir. Sir. She lowered the phone and looked at it, as if it had bitten her. Then the windows along the ambulance bay lit up gray-white, as landing lights swung across them through the rain, and the doubled thunder walked in off the water and sat down on top of the building, and everything loose in the department began to buzz. They are landing in the parking lot, Yvonne said to no one, to everyone. Her voice had gone up half an octave. Both of them. They are landing in my parking lot. The department broke into the particular chaos of civilians meeting the military at speed. Okafor came out of room 4, fast gloves still on. Marsh appeared from the physician's lounge, demanding to know who had authorized a sentence he did not get to finish because no one was listening. Security, both of them, hurried toward the bay doors and then visibly decided to hurry more slowly. Registration staff stood up at their desks to see. Through the glass past, the rain, the parking lot had become a rotor storm. Water standing up off the asphalt in silver sheets, 2 gray airframes flaring in with their nacelles, tilted skyward. Wingtip lights strobing against the cloud. Quinn. Yvonne's finger found me across the chaos. Wall. Now. Whatever this is, my staff handles it. You do not touch anything, you do not talk to anyone, you stay out from underfoot. For once in 3 years, I obeyed her with my whole heart. I put my back against the corridor wall, actual load-bearing concrete, and I shoved my hands into my scrub pockets because they had started to shake. Not surgical shake, deep shake from the wrists. Around my right thumb on its own, the coin had already begun its lapse. The smell arrived before the men did. Jet exhaust driven through the ambulance bay. Seals by rotor wash, kerosene sweet and everywhere, and underneath it wet nylon and something scorched. My mouth went dry. 3 years of rain, and fir trees, and bleach, gone in one breath, and the world smelled like the back of an aircraft again, like the hillside, like the 90 seconds before too late. Not my problem, I told the inside of my own skull. This is a hospital. They are bringing a patient to a hospital. There are doctors here. There is a whole system here. Nobody knows your name. The bay doors blew open against their stops, and I stood against my wall in my blue scrubs, with my face arranged, one more terrified civilian in a row of them, while the first man through the doors, soaked, armored, spattered dark across the chest, with what wasn't rain, swept the entire department once, with his eyes the way you sweep a landing zone, looking for something, looking for someone. They came through the doors in a wedge, 4 of them around a litter, and the emergency department of St. Albans Regional simply stopped functioning as an idea. These were not paramedics. Paramedics arrive apologizing, reciting numbers fitting themselves into the room. These men made the room fit them. Soaked black and gray kit helmets off weapons slung and taped, and they moved in a synchronized hurry that had no panic in it anywhere, which to me was the loudest thing in the building. Calm like that is bought, and the currency is repetition. Clear a bay, the lead man called. Not shouted. Projected flat and huge, a voice built for rotor noise. Trauma bay right now, and I need your most senior physician and whatever blood you are holding. Marsh stepped up, because stepping up in rooms was his entire life. I am Dr. Marsh. I am the senior physician, and I need to know exactly who you people think you. They walked through him, not into him. Through the space he was decorating the litter swinging past close enough to brush his fleece, and Marsh did a small, stuttering sidestep that nobody in that department would ever unsee. I saw the patient for 1.5 seconds as they passed my wall. A man in his 30s kit cut away to the waist, and the right side of his neck and jaw peppered dark red under a pressure dressing that was doing maybe half its job. Fragmentation. Close, small, fast. His chest was working in the wrong shape, sucking high and hard, and over the rotor noise still bleeding through the walls, I heard it thin and musical and evil. Strider. Air crying through a doorway that is closing. My hands went cold and specific. They set the litter down in Bay 1, and the last member of the team came through the doors, and the whole grammar of the room changed again, because she was the one in charge, and every man in that wedge oriented to her like iron filings. Not large. Compact, drenched dark hair flat to her skull, a medical ruck on her back that she swung down in one move. Chief Alvarez. 3 years had put white in her hair at the temple, and something new and terrible in the set of her mouth, but I would have known her in total darkness by the sound of her boots. I turned my face toward the supply shelf beside me and read the label on a box of gloves like scripture. Listen up. Alvarez's voice cut the room into order. Blast and fragmentation to the face and neck 40 minutes ago airway is burning down. He needs a surgical airway and a surgeon in that order, and our flight surgeon is on the other bird with the other casualty. Weather has Seattle out of reach. You are what exists. Who in this building can cut a neck silence with monitors in it? Okafor came forward, pulling gloves, and God bless him, his voice was steady. I can attempt a cricothyrotomy. I have done 2, both supervised, both in residency. Alvarez looked at him for 1 second, and the look was not unkind. It was arithmetic. Attempt, she repeated. She had knelt at the litter head, 2 fingers on the wounded man's throat, reading the wreckage under the dressing. This is not a teaching airway doctor. His landmarks are gone off the right side. It is going to be by feel, and as she checked the monitor her team had slapped on minutes. Low single digits. Then we call the OR Marsh, said, reasserting from the perimeter. We get anesthesia down here. We do this properly. There are protocols precisely. For anesthesia is 11 minutes out, someone said. Marisol actually from the desk phone, her voice shaking and her information perfect. She had called before anyone told her to. On call from home, driving now 11 minutes. 11 minutes, Alvarez said, is a eulogy. And then she stood up, and she stopped commanding the room, and she did the thing I had been dreading since the pressure changed. She searched it. Face by face, fast over the nurses' station past Yvonne, past the huddle of techs, and there was a question mark burning through her composure. Now the first crack in it because she had spent something coming here. She had bet a man's life on a rumor, and the rumor was supposed to be standing in this department. I know she works here, Alvarez said. Loud. To everyone. Female 40s came to this town about 3 years ago. She will be wearing nurses' scrubs, and she will be acting like furniture. Flight registry ran her license to this facility. Yvonne magnificently uselessly stepped into it. Sir. Ma'am. I am the charge nurse. If you give me a name, I can check the schedule. But I promise you, there is no trauma specialist on my staff. We are a small regional. Her call sign is St. Alvarez said. The word went off in that department like a flare over water, and nobody knew it. But me. It hung there, lighting everything, and 30 civilians looked at each other under it, and their faces all said the same thing. A call sign, like a movie. Nobody here. Wrong hospital. Marisol was frowning, trying to bolt the syllable onto anyone she knew. Marsh had folded his arms into a lecture about jurisdiction that no one would ever hear. Yvonne shook her head slowly, sincerely, the head shake of an honest woman with a green board, and no saints on it, and I stood against my concrete, with my dead ear ringing, and my thumb going around Vega's coin, lap after lap after lap. And I want to be precise now, because this is the part I have replayed the most. I was not deciding whether to save him. Hold that against me if you need to. The decision on the litter was already made. Somewhere below my conscience had been made since the strider my body had inventoried that airway drawer 9 hours ago, and it knew the walk to Bay 1 was 11 steps. What I was deciding was whether Nora Quinn got to live. She was 3 years old. She had a rental with good sight lines, and a truck, and 4 hours of sleep a night, and a coin she never took out of her pocket. And she had almost learned to stand in a room where someone said the word clicks without her chest seizing. 1 step off this wall, and she was dead. And I would be back. The debt would be back. Every syllable of that name, shouted across every helipad on 3 continents, would come due at once, and there would be no third life after this one to hide in. This town was the last quiet place on the map. The strider climbed half a tone, the doorway closing. On the litter, the man's hand came up blind, swollen, and gripped the rail, and one of his teammates leaned down and wrapped it in both of his, and I heard the teammate say, "Stay with me, brother. She is here somewhere," and Alvarez turned her search 1 more degree, and her eyes crossed my corridor. They did not stop on my face. Why would they? 3 years rain a different woman's haircut sleeves down a stranger's flat civilian eyes. They stopped on my wrist. On the old field watch face turned to the inside that my hands had never once agreed to buckle the other way. Her chin came up a 1/4 inch, and at that exact moment the strider from the litter stopped. Not eased. Stopped into the specific silence I had heard once on a hillside in East Africa, the silence that is a tide arriving, and the monitor began its long falling tone. And somewhere behind me, Marisol made a sound like a hiccup of grief, and I felt the wall leave my back. I did not decide it. I have never been able to tell the story any other way and keep it true. My feet were simply done, waiting for me, the way they had been done at the supply cart, the way my hands had been done for 3 years. 11 steps. I heard my own voice come out of me, and it was not the flat furniture voice. It was the other one, the one with rotors in it. And it said, "Move." Kit stays. Everyone who has never seen this done back 1 meter. And it said it to men with weapons, and every one of them moved. Founder Alvarez said quietly to nobody to the room to 3 years. The 11 steps ended at the litter head, and the world got very small and very orderly the way it always did. Noise fell off the edges. Color stayed. Time went granular. The man on the litter was gray around the lips, chest heaving against a door that no longer opened, and the wreckage of his neck told me in one glance what Alvarez already knew. The right side landmarks were gone, swollen and peppered, and wrong. This would be done by feel on the midline, by hands that had done it, by feel before. My hands were not shaking. I want that on the record. From the moment the wall left my back, they were the steadiest objects in that building. "Yvonne," I said, and I didn't raise my voice, because the voice I was using does not need raising. Airway cart. 3rd drawer, the Crick kit. It is there because I stocked it this morning. Scalpel bougie, size 6 tube. You can write me up after he breathes. For 1 second, she stood absolutely still. Then the charge nurse in her, the real one, the one who is better at this job than she is, at People Beat the toll booth operator, and she moved. She did not run. She did something better. She was back in 8 seconds with the kit already open. "Dr. Okafor," I said. "Right side of the bed. Your hands on his head. Do not let him move when he wakes up angry. And he will wake up angry. That is the goal." The team had him held. Alvarez took the left without being asked, and her being there changed the chemistry of my blood in a way I did not have time to feel. I stripped the pressure dressing back, just enough, poured the antiseptic in one pass, and put my left hand on his throat. You read a ruined neck the way you read a map in the dark with your fingertips and your memory. Swelling everywhere, tissue tight as a drum, but the midline is loyal. Thyroid cartilage. The dip below it. The small firm ring of the cricoid. Between them under one fingertip, the shallow softness I was renting everything on. I fixed it under my finger, and I did not let go of it again, because in a neck like that, if you lose your place, you do not get to find it twice. "Cutting," I said to the room to him, to the version of me on a hillside 3 years ago who never got to say it in time. The scalpel went in vertical and firm, and there is no elegant way to say what that moment is. It is a decision made of steel. Dark blood welled and ran, and I ignored it, because bleeding you can fix, and suffocation you cannot. Down through the membrane with a give. I felt in my back teeth, then the handle turned the opening held, and I asked for the bougie without looking, and felt it slapped into my palm. Yvonne. Plastic guide and sliding past my fingertip, the faint clicks of it riding the rings of the trachea, telling me I was in the road, and not in the ditch. Tube over the top, seated cuff up. "Bag him," I said. Okafor squeezed the bag, and the man's chest rose. Both sides, even and full and human. The sound he made around that tube on the second breath was the ugliest, most beautiful noise I know a ragged animal, howl of air arriving in a starving body, and half the department flinched at it, and every operator in the room sagged an inch because they knew that sound, and it means alive. "Sats coming up," Marisol read from the monitor voice, cracking. 79, 85, 91. Do not relax, I said, because his blood pressure was garbage, and the monitor was telling me why even before his teammate said it. He is still bleeding somewhere. Log, roll away from me, I want his right hip. They rolled him, and there it was. The wound the neck had been hiding by being louder, a fragment entry high in the crease of the groin, dark blood coming steady, the kind of location that laughs at tourniquets. I packed it. There is no gentle version. Hemostatic gauze deep direct against the source, my whole body weight, through the heels of my hands, and he woke up under me exactly as angry as I had promised, and 4 men held him down, and one of them put his forehead against the wounded man's forehead and talked him through it in the oldest language there is. Brother, brother, brother. 3 minutes of pressure. I counted them out loud in tens, because counting is what I am. Somewhere in the middle, Marsh's voice tried to happen the word liability, rising over the monitors like a mosquito, and Alvarez turned her head 1 inch toward him, and he became a man remembering an appointment elsewhere. Blood, I said. He needs volume, not saline. 2 units of O-neg from your fridge, and your rapid infuser is primed. I did it this morning. Yvonne stared at me for half a breath, hearing the shape of the whole day differently. Then she moved. By the time anesthesia arrived, breathless, 11 minutes exactly, there was nothing left for him to do but raise his eyebrows at the tube in the man's neck and say, "Well, that is in the right place." By the time the general surgeon came down, the packing was holding, pressure, was climbing out of the basement, and the patient, a petty officer whose name tape read Okonkwo, had a blood pressure with 2 whole digits in front, and a working set of lungs, and a grip on his teammate's hand that left marks. He goes to your OR to get the packing exchanged and the fragments mapped, Alvarez said to the surgeon, and then he flies. Weather lifts in 90 minutes. I want him stable enough to survive being loved by a military hospital. The surgeon, to his eternal credit, just nodded and started giving orders. They took Okonkwo down the hall in a convoy of civilians and soldiers, all pushing the same gurney, which is a sentence I want to leave exactly as it is. And the noise went with him. And Bay, one was suddenly a ruin of wrappers and blood and rainwater boot prints, with one float nurse standing in the middle of it. The department looked at me. All of it. Yvonne with a clipboard held against her chest like a shield. Marisol with her hands over her mouth. Okafor with an expression I recognized from mirrors, a man rewriting a week of memories with new information. Marsh from a distance, arms folded already composing the version where he supervised. My hands chose that moment to start shaking, now that it was safe, now that it was allowed, and I put them in my pockets, and my thumb found the coin. The rain filled the silence. Somebody's monitor chirped. It was Alvarez who ended it. She peeled off her gloves, walked through the wreckage of the bay, and stopped in front of me. And for the first time in 3 years, someone at St. Albans Regional looked at my face and saw the person wearing it. Up close, she smelled like jet fuel and wet nylon, and the inside of an aircraft, like the whole world I had driven to the edge of a continent to lose. She did not salute. She did not say the name, not yet, not in front of them. She looked down at my wrist at the watch, with its face turned in, and something moved through her expression that was equal parts fury and grief and relief, 3 years of unanswered questions arriving at once. "Nice catch on the groin bleed," she said. "Quinn." The pause before Quinn was 1 millimeter wide and a mile deep. Then she turned to the room to Yvonne and became command again. "I need a phone with an outside line, your administrator, and a pot of whatever this building calls coffee. My people will clear the lot for your ambulances. We will be out of your hospital within 2 hours." She walked toward the charge desk and the department exhaled, and the ordinary noise of medicine came flooding back like water finding its level, and I stood, in bay, one flexing my rinsed hands 40 feet, and one lifetime from the wall I had been holding up an hour ago. 2 hours, I thought. She had set it to the room, but she had aimed it at me, and I heard the actual sentence, underneath the one built for rotor noise. You have 2 hours, Saint. And then you and I are going to talk. I found my way to the decontamination room off the ambulance bay, because it was the one place in that building with a heavy door and a drain in the floor, and I stood at the deep steel sink and washed a man's blood off my forearms for the second time in my life, without an aircraft waiting outside for me. The water ran red, then pink, then clear. The graft scar on my right arm shone under the fluorescent light run slick and old, and I watched it and breathed and did not fall down, which I counted as a victory of the highest order. The door opened behind me. I knew the boots. Alvarez shut it, leaned against the wall beside the biohazard bins, and let a silence happen. She had shed her kit somewhere. Wet undershirt sidearm and 3 years of white at her temple, and she watched me dry my hands one finger at a time. 3 years, she said finally. No forwarding address. No answer on any number I had. Your own mother told me she got postcards with no return on them. Leave my mother out of this, I said. But there was no edge on it. I was too tired to sharpen anything. You know what today cost me, she said. I burned a favor with Flight Registry that I had been saving for a war. I diverted 2 airframes on a weather call I will be explaining for a month. Because 18 months ago, a warrant officer told me a story about a nurse in some rain-soaked timber town who talked a doctor into a bone drill without ever raising her voice, and I thought no. It could not be. She would not be that dumb. She would at least change the watch. I looked down at my wrist, face turned in. 3 years of trying, and my hands had never once agreed to it. He would be dead, Alvarez said. Okonkwo, if you were not exactly this dumb in exactly this town, he dies on my litter 40 minutes from anywhere. So I am not here to apologize for finding you. Then why are you here, Chief? She pushed off the wall, came to the sink, and set something on the steel edge beside the soap. A coin. For one wild second, I thought my own pocket had been picked, and then I saw it properly. Same crest as Vega's newer edges, still sharp and stamped on the reverse, where the anchor should be a small figure with a ring above its head. A saint. The unit had these struck the year after you left, she said. Everyone who flew with you carries one. Okonkwo has his zipped in his kit right now, which means when he wakes up in San Diego, he is going to learn that the actual saint cut his actual airway in a parking lot hospital in the middle of a rainstorm. And Nora, there is not a force on this earth that will keep that story from traveling. I dried my hands again. They did not need it. I could not save him, I said. It came out of me sideways after 3 years in a decon room that smelled like bleach. Vega. I had the blade in my hand, Elena. I was reaching for the kit. I know, she said. I was on the net. I heard the whole thing. And she did not tell me it was not my fault, which is why I have always trusted her, because instead, she said the truer thing. You have been running the math wrong. You count him as a debt you owe. Everyone who was on that hillside counts him as the reason you never hesitated again. Today the bill came, and look what your hands did with it. The rain ticked against the little window high in the wall. 400 count. I had my number back. She did not ask me to come back. That is the part I keep turning over. She picked up her gloves, walked to the door, and stopped with her hand on it. The birds are wheels up in 40 minutes, she said. There is a jump seat on mine, and there is a flight surgeon slot with your name on it, collecting dust, and neither of those things is why I came. I came because for 3 years, the last image I had of you was a hospital corridor in Germany, and now it is you standing in bay. One telling a room full of strangers he needs volume, not saline. That trade was worth 2 airframes. She opened the door. Whatever you decide, Saint, decide it. Standby is not a life. And she was gone. Boots down the corridor, and Vega's coin, and Okonkwo's coin, sat on the edge of the sink, not quite touching. And I stood between them the way you stand, between 2 lives. I did not fly out with them. Let me say that plainly, because the stories people tell about that day at St. Albans have me roping out of an Osprey by nightfall. I stood at the ambulance bay glass with half the department and watched the 2 aircraft lift out of my parking lot into the first blue tear in the cloud deck. In 11 days, water sheeting off the asphalt in silver rings, and when the sound of them faded off the peninsula, my dead ear went quiet, and the building hummed, and somewhere behind me a monitor chirped about a kidney stone. Both coins were in my pocket. The jump seat had gone empty, but I had put my hand on the airframe before they buttoned it up, one flat palm on wet metal, which in the language I was raised in is not goodbye. It is, see you out there. The department did not know how to have me back. Marisol hugged me, sudden and fierce, and 19, and then apologized for it. And I told her the truth, which is that she had done the single most important thing anyone did that day, because she called anesthesia before anyone told her to. And 11 minutes early is a superpower. Write that down, I told her. The person who thinks 1 step ahead is worth 10 people who move fast. She wrote it down. She actually wrote it down. Okafor shook my hand and did not ask a single question, which told me he understood exactly what he had seen. Earl admitted at last to a bed upstairs, heard the whole story from a transport tech by dinner, and reportedly laughed until his oxygen alarm went off. When I came to check on him, he was propped up like a king, and he tapped 2 fingers below his left ear and said, "Saint, huh? I had you figured for a screaming eagle." And I said, "Drink your water, Earl." And he said, "Yes, ma'am," and saluted with the water cup, and I let him see me smile. Yvonne found me at the end of shift at the board, where floats go to be reassigned. She had her reading glasses up in her hair, and a printout in her hand, and something almost human in her face. "Administration wants you in the executive suite at 8 tomorrow," she said. "Risk management, the CEO, some form of debrief." She hesitated, and then quietly. In the closest thing to an apology, her operating system supported the crick kit, was in the 3rd drawer. Everything was where you said. The whole cart was perfect. "I stocked it," I said. "That is what floats do." "Quinn, about the meeting, what do I tell them?" I looked at the board. Green across, rooms turning coffee hot, a small hospital in a wet town going about the holy boredom of keeping people alive, and I felt the answer arrive with no shaking in it anywhere. "Tell them I am not a fixture," I said. "I am a float. I do not touch anything that beeps." And then I picked up the transport list for the morning, put it in my pocket next to 2 coins, and walked out into the rain counting. Standby is not a life, Elena had said. She was right. But there is a 3rd thing between hiding and the war, and I think it looks like a woman in blue scrubs in a timber town who answers when the pressure changes, whoever it is that comes through the doors. The license plate frame on my truck is still blank. The watch still faces in. And 2 weeks later, when a letter arrived at the hospital, addressed only to Saint Care of St. Albans ER in a petty officer's careful block handwriting, I opened it in the break room with steady hands. It said in full, "Ma'am, I am told I owe you a new set of scrubs and my entire life. The scrubs are in the mail. The rest I intend to spend well." Oh, the scrubs arrived that Friday. Navy blue, exactly my size. Somebody in San Diego had done their homework, and I wore them on Monday, and nobody at St. Albans said a word. But Yvonne put me on the trauma bay assignment permanently, without ever announcing it, which in her language was a medal. Some names we bury. Some names get up and find us carried on rotor wash and rainstorms, and the stubborn gratitude of the people we could not lose. Nora Quinn floats. Saint answers. It turns out they can share the locker. If this story of hidden scars and a debt repaid in a rainstorm held you to the end, hit that like button and share it with someone who is carrying a name they think they buried. Subscribe for more stories of the quiet professionals, hiding in plain sight, the ones who answer when the pressure changes. And tell me in the comments if you were standing against that wall when they called her name. Would you have stepped forward? Stay tuned. The next story is already inbound.